You signed it without reading the last page? My sister whispered beside me as Ryan's attorney slid the settlement agreement across the polished walnut table. She read it, Ryan answered for me, loosening his tie like the whole thing bored him already. Naomi knows when a fight is over. His mother actually smiled at that. Smiled. Then she reached for her coffee and said, "Honestly, sweetheart, this is probably for the best. Maintaining a lake house alone would have been impossible for you anyway." Everyone in that room looked at me like I was already erased. 11 years of marriage, reduced to a woman sitting quietly in a gray blazer while her husband took the house, the investment accounts, the company offices, even the wine collection we bought together in Napa 3 summers ago. I remember staring at the tiny water stain near the corner of the conference table while Ryan calmly explained why he deserved everything. "I built this business from scratch," he said, not even looking at me anymore. Naomi was supportive, sure, but let's be honest about who carried the weight here. Supportive. That word almost made me laugh. Because 3 years ago, while Ryan slept upstairs in our 4-bedroom lakefront house outside Chicago, I was the one sitting barefoot on the kitchen floor at 2:00 a.m., rebuilding our entire client infrastructure after his largest account threatened to walk away. But nobody in that room knew that. Or maybe they never cared enough to ask. Before this story continues, if you've ever stayed quiet while someone rewrote your sacrifices like they meant nothing, then maybe this story will speak to your heart. And if it does, you can gently like the video, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what your local time is right now. Sometimes it helps to remember how many people across the world are listening quietly with you in moments like this. My name is Naomi Carter. I'm 36 years old, and the day my husband took everything in our divorce was the day I realized nobody in my family had ever truly known me at all. It started 6 months earlier at my mother-in-law's Christmas party. The kind with valet parking and white roses floating in crystal bowls like the house belonged in a magazine spread. Ryan had spent the entire drive there criticizing my dress. "You couldn't wear something softer?" he asked, while checking his reflection in the rearview mirror. "You look like you're headed to a board meeting." I looked down at the navy dress I bought on clearance from Nordstrom Rack and said quietly, "I came straight from work." "Exactly," he muttered. At dinner, his younger brother Trevor announced his engagement while everyone clapped and raised champagne glasses. Then somehow the conversation turned toward ambition. It always did around Ryan's family. Success was their favorite religion. "Ryan says you're finally slowing down with work," Trevor's fiancée said politely. "That must be nice." Ryan laughed before I could answer. "Naomi's good at staying busy, but she's not exactly chasing empires." Everyone chuckled softly like it was harmless. His mother reached over and patted my wrist. "Not everyone's built for high-level pressure, sweetheart." I still remember the feeling of my wedding ring pressing cold against the stem of my wine glass while they talked about me like I wasn't sitting there. The worst part wasn't Ryan joining in. It was how natural it seemed for him. Like somewhere over the years he'd stopped seeing me as his partner and started seeing me as furniture. Something useful, quiet, replaceable. Later that night, after we got home, I stood in our kitchen rinsing dishes while Ryan loosened his cufflinks behind me. "You embarrassed me tonight," he said casually. I turned around slowly. "How?" "You get that look on your face when people talk about business. Like you want credit for things you didn't build." I actually thought I misheard him. "Excuse me?" He sighed dramatically. "This is what I mean, Naomi. You make everything emotional." Then he walked upstairs, while I stood there holding a wet dinner plate in my hand, listening to his footsteps disappear into the second-floor hallway of the house I helped pay for. The next morning, I found a stack of printed financial statements sitting beside his laptop in the home office. Numbers highlighted in yellow, legal notes scribbled in the margins. At first I thought it was another investor report, but then I saw the words dissolution strategy across the top page. My stomach dropped so fast I had to sit down. Ryan had already been planning the divorce. Not weeks, months, maybe longer. And the strangest part? He wasn't hiding it very carefully anymore, which meant he believed I was too distracted or too insignificant to understand what he was doing. But as I kept turning those pages, I noticed something else buried between property valuations and asset projections. One tiny line connected to a licensing agreement Ryan clearly didn't recognize. And the second I saw it, I realized my husband had just made the biggest mistake of his life. I did not confront Ryan after finding the documents in his office. That is the part people never understand when I tell this story later. They always ask why I stayed quiet, why I did not throw the papers in his face or demand answers right there in our kitchen with the marble countertops and the expensive pendant lights I picked out during the renovation he loved taking credit for. But when you spend most of your life learning how to survive inside other people's expectations, silence becomes instinct. And I learned that long before I married Ryan Carter. I grew up in a narrow 2-story house outside Milwaukee, with pale blue siding that peeled every winter no matter how many times my father repainted it. My older brother Luke was the center of everything in our family. Football trophies lined the hallway shelves before he even turned 16. My mother kept framed newspaper clippings of his high school games beside the dining room window like family heirlooms. Meanwhile, my achievements lived inside drawers nobody opened. I still remember coming home at 14 holding a statewide academic medal so tightly the ribbon left marks across my palm. I walked into the kitchen expecting excitement. My mother was frosting a sheet cake for Luke's playoff banquet. "Mom," I said breathlessly, "I won first place." She glanced over for maybe 2 seconds before reaching for more icing. "That is wonderful, honey. Put it somewhere safe so it does not get scratched." Then she called toward the living room. "Luke, do not forget Coach Reynolds is coming at 6. That was it. No hug, no questions, just frosting and football schedules. Later that night, I sat alone on the basement stairs while everyone upstairs celebrated Luke's win over Brookfield East. Their laughter traveled through the vents while I turned my medal over and over in my lap, wondering why accomplishments only mattered when they belonged to someone louder than me. My father used to say, "Naomi is independent. She does not need much attention." People hear that sentence and think it sounds complimentary. It is not. Sometimes it is just another way of saying nobody notices when you are lonely. By college, I had become very good at making myself useful instead of visible. I worked 28 hours a week at a copy center near campus while studying business systems and operations management. I ate microwaved soup for dinner most nights because tuition payments mattered more than groceries. The winter I turned 21, the heater in my apartment broke during a snowstorm, and my landlord stopped answering calls. I slept wearing 2 hoodies under 3 blankets while finishing a systems analysis project due at 8 the next morning. That project ended up winning a statewide competition. My professor shook my hand afterward and said, "You think like someone who builds things people rely on." I never forgot that sentence because nobody had ever described me that way before. Ryan and I met 6 months later at a networking mixer downtown. He was charming immediately, the kind of man who made direct eye contact and remembered details from conversations. He asked questions about my work, real questions. "What exactly do operational systems do?" he asked while balancing 2 paper cups of coffee in his hands. I laughed nervously and said, "Mostly they stop companies from collapsing when nobody notices the foundation is cracked." "That sounds important," he said, and for the first time in my life, I felt seen. At least I thought I was. Back then, Ryan was ambitious, but struggling. He wore suits that fit slightly wrong and drove a silver Honda Accord with a cracked passenger side mirror held together with black tape. We spent Friday nights sharing takeout Chinese food on the floor of my apartment because neither of us could afford furniture yet. He used to fall asleep with his head in my lap while spreadsheets glowed across my laptop screen. "One day we are going to build something incredible together," he whispered once around midnight while snow fell outside my apartment windows. I believed him so completely it scares me now. Looking back, the signs were already there. Small things. The first time he introduced one of my ideas at a client meeting without mentioning my name. The way investors shook his hand while I stood beside presentation screens adjusting technical errors nobody else noticed. The night his mother looked around our first tiny office space and said, "Ryan always had leadership qualities. It is good Naomi can support him properly." Support him. Like I was scaffolding instead of structure. I should have recognized the pattern because I had lived inside it my entire life. But love makes repetition feel familiar instead of dangerous. A week after finding the divorce documents, I sat alone in our kitchen after midnight while Ryan slept upstairs. Rain tapped softly against the windows facing the lake. I opened the licensing file again and read every page carefully this time. Halfway through paragraph 7, my breathing slowed. Then I noticed something handwritten in the margin beside one of the legal signatures. Something Ryan definitely had not seen yet. And suddenly, for the first time since our marriage started falling apart, I was not afraid anymore. The handwritten note in the margin changed the way I looked at my entire marriage. It was small, barely noticeable unless you knew legal language well enough to understand what you were reading. Operational infrastructure rights remain attached to originating entity. That single sentence sat beside a signature from 7 years earlier, back when Ryan and I were still working out of a rented office above a dry cleaner in Evanston, with stained carpet and a heater that rattled every winter morning. I remember sitting there until almost 3 in the morning, rereading those words while rain slid slowly down the kitchen windows behind me. Upstairs, Ryan slept peacefully in our king-sized bed, completely unaware that the foundation beneath his perfect future had just shifted. The next morning, he came downstairs, already dressed for work in a charcoal suit I bought him after his first major investor presentation. "You are up early," he said casually, while pouring coffee into his travel mug. "Could not sleep," I answered. He nodded without really listening. Then his phone buzzed and his entire expression softened in a way I had not seen directed at me in a very long time. He smiled at the screen before turning it face down against the counter. "Big day?" I asked carefully. "Potential expansion deal," he said. "Nothing you need to worry about. Nothing you need to worry about." That sentence followed me all day. I heard it while folding laundry that evening. While standing in line at Whole Foods staring blankly at blueberries, I forgot to buy twice. While watching Ryan laugh quietly at messages during dinner without once telling me who he was talking to, something inside me had started waking up, and once it did, I could not force it back to sleep again. 3 weeks later, I received an email that changed everything even more. I almost ignored it because it arrived at 6:12 a.m., while I was answering client support tickets from our home office. The sender was a venture capital firm out of Seattle called Alder Ridge Partners. Subject line: Request for operational consultation. At first I assumed they meant Ryan. That happened often. People contacted him because his name was on presentations and magazine interviews. While my work stayed invisible behind software systems and operational architecture, nobody glamorous ever talked about publicly. But halfway through reading the email, I realized they were specifically asking for me. "We were referred by an executive familiar with your systems integration framework from the 2019 recovery restructure." I stared at the screen so long my coffee went cold beside me. Somebody knew. Somebody important knew exactly what I had built. I did not tell Ryan immediately, not because I wanted revenge, at least not then. I think part of me just wanted one thing that belonged entirely to me before the marriage officially collapsed. The consultation meeting happened downtown at a glass office tower overlooking the Chicago River. I wore a black blazer I had not touched in almost a year, because somewhere along the line I stopped dressing like the woman who solved problems and started dressing like the wife of a successful man. The receptionist handed me a visitor badge and smiled politely. "They are excited to meet you, Miss Carter." Excited. Nobody in Ryan's world ever sounded excited to meet me. Upstairs, 3 executives spent nearly 90 minutes asking detailed questions about infrastructure scaling, systems retention, operational redundancy, and crisis management architecture. The kind of conversations that made my brain feel alive again. At one point, a man named Daniel Foster leaned back in his chair and said, "Honestly, your framework is one of the smartest operational designs we have seen in years." I almost forgot how to respond to praise that was not wrapped in surprise or pity. When I got home that evening, Ryan was hosting drinks on the patio with his brother Trevor and 2 investors. I could hear them laughing before I even opened the sliding glass door. "There she is," Trevor said loudly the second I walked outside. Ryan was just telling us how he practically built this company from his laptop at the kitchen table. Everyone laughed. Ryan lifted his bourbon glass slightly toward me. "Long day?" he asked. I stood there for one strange second looking at the sunset reflecting across the lake behind them. Pink light, expensive patio furniture, men talking about success like they invented hard work itself. Then Ryan added casually, "Naomi keeps things running at home so I can focus on growth." The investors nodded politely. One of them smiled at me the way people smile at flight attendants during turbulence. Friendly but dismissive. I felt something cold settle inside my chest then. Not pain exactly. Clarity. "Actually," I said quietly, "I had meetings today too." Ryan barely glanced up from his drink. "That is nice, babe. That is nice." I went upstairs after that and closed the bedroom door softly behind me. Then I opened my laptop and saw another email waiting from Alder Ridge Partners. This one was different, shorter, more direct. "We would like to discuss a long-term leadership position if you are interested." And downstairs, Through the floorboards, I could still hear my husband telling everyone how he built everything alone. Ryan started changing slowly enough that most people probably would not have noticed it at first. That is the dangerous thing about betrayal. It rarely arrives all at once. It leaks into your life quietly, like water under a locked door, until one day everything inside the house is warped beyond repair. At first it was little things. Passwords changing on shared accounts. Meetings he suddenly took outside on the patio when I walked into the room. New cologne I did not buy sitting beside the sink in our bathroom. One Friday night, I came downstairs around midnight because I heard voices in the kitchen. Ryan stood near the refrigerator laughing softly while staring at his phone. The light from the screen reflected across his face in a way I had not seen directed at me in years. The second he noticed me standing there barefoot in the hallway, his expression closed instantly. "Who are you talking to?" I asked quietly. "Work," he answered too fast. Then he slid the phone into his pocket. Work. At midnight on a Friday with that smile on his face. I nodded anyway, because part of me still wanted to believe the man I married existed somewhere underneath all this distance. 2 days later, his mother invited us to Sunday dinner at her house in Lake Forest. The dining room looked exactly the same as always. White candles burning in silver holders. Crystal glasses polished so clean they almost disappeared under the chandelier light. Ryan spent most of dinner checking his phone under the table, while his mother talked about a charity gala she was organizing downtown. "Ryan says business is finally entering a different league," she said proudly while cutting into her salmon. "The expansion should change everything." Then she looked directly at me. "I know transitions like this can be difficult for some marriages." I felt my fork stop in my hand. "What does that mean?" I asked carefully. She gave me that same soft smile wealthy women use right before saying something cruel. "Nothing personal, sweetheart. Some people grow together. Some do not." Trevor snorted quietly into his drink, while Ryan stared down at his plate, pretending not to notice. That was the moment I realized they had already been discussing my marriage behind my back for a long time. I drove home in silence that night while rain streaked across the windshield. Ryan finally sighed from the passenger seat and said, "You have been tense lately." I almost laughed at the absurdity of it. "Tense? You keep acting like I am hiding something." I tightened my hands around the steering wheel. "Are you?" He stared out the window for several seconds before answering. "Honestly, Naomi, sometimes I think you create problems because you need drama to feel important." That sentence hit harder than shouting ever could. Because I spent 11 years making myself smaller specifically to avoid conflict, and somehow even my silence had become inconvenient to him. 3 weeks later, everything cracked open completely. I found out about the other woman by accident. Her name was Savannah, 28 years old, marketing consultant, blonde hair that always looked professionally curled, even in casual photos. I discovered her through a tagged picture on social media from a rooftop bar downtown. Ryan sat beside her with his hand resting casually against the back of her chair, while both of them smiled into the camera like people with nothing to hide. Caption: Power dinner with brilliant people. My chest went cold so fast I had to sit down on the edge of the bed. I zoomed in on the photo until the pixels blurred because some irrational part of me hoped I was imagining it. Then my phone buzzed. It was my friend Melissa. "Naomi," she said carefully the second I answered. "I did not know if you already knew." That sentence told me everything before she even finished speaking. Melissa had seen them together twice before. Once at a hotel lounge downtown. Once at a networking event in Seattle, Ryan claimed was canceled due to weather. "People are talking," she admitted quietly. "I am sorry." I sat there staring at the framed wedding photo on my dresser while she spoke. Ryan and I smiling under string lights beside the lake 11 years earlier. I looked so sure of him in that picture, so safe. When Ryan got home that evening, I was standing in the kitchen waiting. The social media photo sat open on my laptop screen between us. He froze the second he saw it. Then instead of guilt, I watched irritation spread slowly across his face. "You went through my things?" he asked flatly. I actually blinked in disbelief. "That is your concern right now?" He rubbed both hands across his jaw like I was exhausting him. "Savannah understands the pressure I am under right now." Understands. I felt something inside me crack so quietly, it almost sounded peaceful. "How long?" I whispered. Ryan did not answer immediately. That silence was worse than the truth itself. Finally, he looked at me and said, "I did not plan for this to happen, But that was a lie too, because downstairs in his office, hidden beneath merger reports and investment proposals, divorce papers were already waiting with my name printed neatly across the top. The strange thing about heartbreak is how ordinary the world keeps looking while your entire life quietly collapses underneath it. The morning after Ryan admitted the affair, the coffee maker still turned on automatically at 6:15. The neighbor across the lake still walked his golden retriever along the shoreline, wearing the same red windbreaker. A delivery truck still dropped groceries at the house next door, while I sat alone at our kitchen island, staring at my untouched tea growing cold beside my phone. Ryan had left early without saying goodbye. Around 8:40, my phone buzzed with a text from him. We should try to handle this like adults. Like adults. As if betrayal was just a scheduling conflict. I stared at the message for almost a full minute before setting the phone face down again. Then, another message arrived. I think some space might help. 2 hours later, his mother called. I almost did not answer, but years of conditioning pulled my thumb across the screen automatically. Naomi, she said in that controlled voice wealthy women use when pretending concern. Ryan told me there has been tension. Tension, not cheating, not lies. Tension. I leaned back slowly against the kitchen chair. Is that what he called it? There was a pause on the line. Marriage is complicated sometimes. I actually laughed softly at that because the understatement felt unreal. Your son is having an affair. Silence filled the call for several seconds before she finally sighed. Ryan is under extraordinary pressure right now. There it was. Excuse disguised as empathy. You always make him the victim, I whispered. No, she answered carefully. I just think successful men sometimes need understanding instead of conflict. I ended the call without responding because I suddenly understood something painful. Nobody in Ryan's family planned to hold him accountable for any of this. They were going to rewrite the story until I became the difficult wife who failed to support an ambitious man properly. And the worst part was how believable they made it sound. Over the next few weeks, the damage spread quietly through every corner of my life. Friends stopped calling as often. Invitations disappeared. One afternoon, I walked into a cafe near downtown Evanston and froze when I noticed 2 women from our social circle sitting near the window. They saw me immediately. One lowered her voice. The other gave me that careful smile people use around someone publicly humiliated. Naomi, she said awkwardly, how are you holding up? Holding up. Like I had become a natural disaster people discussed over coffee. I nodded politely, ordered my drink, and left before my hands started shaking visibly. At home, Ryan became almost aggressively calm. He slept in the guest room some nights. Other nights he did not come home at all. But somehow he still acted irritated whenever I looked hurt. I need clarity right now, he said one evening while standing in the hallway buttoning his shirt. You being emotional about everything makes this harder. Emotional. I remember gripping the edge of the bathroom sink after he left because my reflection suddenly looked unfamiliar to me. Pale skin. Tired eyes. A woman who spent years shrinking herself for a marriage that now treated her pain like an inconvenience. Then came the emails. Legal language. Financial disclosures. Settlement drafts sent by Ryan's attorney with subject lines so cold they barely sounded human. Proposed division of marital assets. Revised property allocation. Every attachment carried the same message underneath the formal wording. Ryan intended to keep everything. The house, the investment accounts, the company offices. Even the boat dock permit for the lake house somehow appeared on the asset list, like they were cataloging furniture after a flood. My attorney, Diane Mercer, sat across from me during one meeting, flipping slowly through the paperwork with narrowed eyes. This is unusually aggressive, she admitted quietly. Did you contribute financially to the business at any stage? I looked down at my hands folded in my lap. Yes. Do you have documentation? Probably. Even then, I still could not fully explain the truth out loud. Diane removed her glasses carefully. Naomi, I need you to understand something. Your husband is building a narrative here. Narrative. That word stayed with me all night, because she was right. Ryan was not just leaving me. He was rewriting our entire history while people nodded along believing him. A week later, I found proof of how far it had spread. Trevor accidentally forwarded me a family group email chain discussing the divorce. I do not think he realized my address was still included. Ryan's mother wrote, Naomi has always depended heavily on Ryan's stability, Trevor replied. Honestly, she never seemed built for high-pressure business life anyway. Then Ryan answered beneath both messages with only one sentence. I tried longer than most men would have. I stared at that email until the words blurred together. 11 years reduced to a burden he deserved praise for carrying. That night I sat alone in the dark living room, listening to the grandfather clock near the staircase tick softly through the silence. Ryan was gone again. Outside, wind moved across the lake hard enough to shake the windows slightly. My phone stayed completely still beside me for hours. No calls, no apologies, no one asking if I was okay. And for the first time in my life, I realized how completely invisible a woman can become once people decide her story no longer matters. The divorce became official on a gray Thursday morning in early March. Chicago still looked trapped between winter and spring, the sidewalks wet from melting snow, tree branches bare against a colorless sky. I remember sitting in the attorney conference room listening to heaters hum softly through the vents, while Ryan signed papers with the calm confidence of a man certain he was walking away victorious. He barely looked at me anymore. That hurt more than the affair sometimes. The way 11 years could slowly reduce a person into background noise. Diane slid the final settlement toward me carefully. Take your time, she said under her breath. But there was nothing left to negotiate. Ryan had pushed for everything aggressively, and somehow made it sound reasonable to everyone around him. The lake house stayed with him. The investment portfolio stayed with him. The company offices, the client contracts, the primary accounts, all of it stayed with him. Even the dining table we bought during our first profitable year somehow ended up listed under his property allocation because his attorney argued it belonged to the office entertainment inventory originally. I signed quietly while Ryan's mother watched from the far end of the room wearing cream-colored cashmere and an expression that looked dangerously close to satisfaction. This is the cleanest outcome for everyone, she said softly once the papers were finished. Cleanest. Like the marriage had been a stain, they finally removed from expensive fabric. Ryan exhaled slowly beside me and loosened his tie. I appreciate you not dragging this out, he said. I looked at him for a long second. The man who once ate cold takeout with me on apartment floors while we dreamed about building a future together now sounded like a corporate executive thanking someone for handling paperwork efficiently. Then I smiled faintly and said, Thank you, Ryan. Even Diane looked up sharply at that. Ryan frowned slightly like he could not tell whether I was mocking him or breaking apart in front of him. The truth was stranger than either option. I just felt tired. Deeply tired. By the end of that week, I moved into a one-bedroom apartment 20 minutes north of the city, near an old commuter rail line. The building smelled faintly like radiator heat and old carpet glue. My kitchen drawers stuck whenever humidity changed. The water pipes knocked loudly at night whenever neighbors upstairs showered after midnight. But it was quiet there. Quiet in a way the lake house had not been for a very long time. The first night alone, I sat cross-legged on the floor eating takeout noodles directly from the carton because I had not unpacked plates yet. My phone stayed completely silent. No calls from family. No messages checking on me. Even my mother only sent one text. Healing takes time. That was all. I stared at those 3 words until the screen dimmed in my hand. Then I placed the phone face down and listened to trains pass outside every 40 minutes like clockwork. Days blurred strangely after that. I woke early, worked quietly, slept poorly. Some mornings I forgot where I was for the first few seconds after opening my eyes because I kept expecting sunlight reflecting off the lake outside our old bedroom windows. Instead, there was only the brick wall of the neighboring building and the faint sound of traffic below. One afternoon, I accidentally drove toward the old house after leaving a grocery store because muscle memory still remembered the route home. My chest tightened so suddenly when I realized where I was heading that I had to pull over beside a gas station until my breathing steadied again. Loneliness does not always feel dramatic. Sometimes it feels small and repetitive, like reaching for a second coffee mug before remembering nobody else lives there anymore, or hearing good news and realizing there is no one left you want to call first. A few weeks later, I saw photos online from a fundraiser at the lake house. Savannah stood beside Ryan wearing a white dress on the deck I spent months designing with a landscape architect 3 summers earlier. The comments underneath the photos cut deeper than I expected. You two look perfect together. Ryan deserves happiness after everything he went through. After everything he went through, I closed the app immediately, but the words stayed with me for hours afterward. That night, I sat alone on the floor beside unopened boxes while rain tapped softly against the apartment windows. For the first time since the divorce became official, I cried hard enough that my ribs actually hurt afterward, not because I wanted Ryan back. That part had already died quietly somewhere along the way. I cried because I finally understood how thoroughly people had accepted his version of me. Weak, dependent, replaceable. The woman who stayed in the background while important people built important things. Around 2 a.m, unable to sleep, I opened my laptop and stared again at the old licensing documents connected to the operational framework I built years earlier. My eyes moved slowly across legal clauses and ownership records while the apartment stayed silent around me, except for the old radiator clicking softly against the wall. Then my inbox refreshed automatically. A new email appeared from Alder Ridge Partners with the subject line, "Final Leadership Proposal Attached." And for the first time in months, something inside me shifted slightly away from grief and towards something else entirely. I accepted the leadership offer from Alder Ridge 3 days later, while sitting at the tiny kitchen counter in my apartment, wearing sweatpants and an oversized sweatshirt with coffee stains near the sleeve. There was something strangely satisfying about that moment, not looking cinematic at all. No dramatic soundtrack, no polished office skyline behind me. Just me staring at my laptop while a train rattled past outside and the old radiator hissed softly against the wall. Daniel Foster appeared on the video call, smiling warmly. "We are very excited about this, Naomi," he said. "Honestly, some of our team has been trying to recruit you for years." I blinked. "Years?" He laughed quietly. "You really did stay invisible on purpose, did not you?" That sentence followed me long after the meeting ended. Invisible on purpose, maybe he was right. Because over time I had become so focused on protecting Ryan's ego, supporting Ryan's image, maintaining Ryan's success, that I slowly disappeared inside my own life, without even noticing it happen. My new routine started the following Monday. Up at 5:30. Coffee brewing while downtown Chicago still looked dark beyond the train windows. Long meetings, infrastructure reviews, crisis strategy sessions with teams who actually listened when I spoke. The first time I walked into Alder Ridge headquarters, I almost felt underdressed, even though everyone else looked exhausted too. The office occupied the top 3 floors of a glass tower overlooking the river. Floor-to-ceiling windows, quiet hallways, people moving quickly with laptops tucked against their ribs like oxygen tanks. Daniel introduced me during a systems briefing that afternoon. "This is Naomi Carter," he said simply. "She built one of the smartest operational frameworks I have seen in 20 years. No one looked surprised that I understood the room. No one smiled politely like I was there by accident. They just started asking questions. Real questions. How would you restructure the integration flow? Can the redundancy system survive a regional outage? Would you rebuild the framework or stabilize it first? I forgot how good it felt to answer without shrinking first. Meanwhile, my old life kept trying to pull me backward. Ryan sent occasional emails about final property logistics. Cold, efficient. Please forward garage access codes. The accountant still requires your signature on prior filings. Nothing personal, nothing human. One afternoon, he called unexpectedly while I was reviewing transition reports in a conference room. I stepped into the hallway before answering. "What?" I asked quietly. There was a pause on the line, like he was surprised by my tone. "I just needed clarification on some archived client files. Talk to legal." Naomi. Hearing my name and his voice again felt strange now. Familiar but distant. "You do not have to make everything hostile." I stared through the office windows at traffic crawling below 27 floors down. "I am not the one who replaced a marriage with paperwork." Silence. Then he exhaled sharply. "You always twist things emotionally." There it was again. The old version of me would have defended herself for hours after hearing that sentence. This time I simply said, "I have a meeting," and hung up first. Small moment, huge difference. Weeks passed. Then months. My apartment slowly started looking less temporary. Real dishes replaced takeout containers. I bought a bookshelf from a secondhand store and spent an entire Sunday assembling it, while jazz played softly from my phone speaker on the counter. One evening I caught myself humming while cooking pasta and stopped completely still because I realized I had not heard myself sound relaxed in years. The loneliness did not disappear entirely. Some nights still hurt unexpectedly. like when I passed couples holding hands downtown or found one of Ryan's old hoodies buried inside a storage box. But the pain no longer controlled the direction of my life. It just existed beside it quietly. Around late summer, Alder Ridge flew me to Seattle for a leadership summit with several major investors. I stood near the hotel windows the first evening, watching ferries move slowly across Elliott Bay, while executives discussed expansion strategies around me. At one point, Daniel handed me a printed financial projection and said, "We are considering making your framework the foundation for all future operations." My hands actually stilled against the paper. Foundation. That word again. Later that night, after the meetings ended, I checked my phone while waiting for the elevator and saw 3 missed calls from Ryan. Not texts, calls. The first voicemail sounded controlled. "Naomi, call me back when you can." The second sounded tense. "There is an issue with the licensing review." By the third message, his voice had changed completely. "I need to talk to you before this gets worse." I stood there in the quiet hotel hallway, listening to his panic echo softly through my phone speaker, while city lights reflected across the windows behind me. Then, for the first time since the divorce, I smiled without sadness at all. By October, my life looked completely different from the one Ryan thought he left behind. Most mornings started before sunrise, with black coffee balanced beside my laptop, while Chicago slowly lit up outside the train windows. Alder Ridge promoted me faster than I expected, because once people finally saw what I could do, they stopped treating me like someone standing in the background. 3 months after joining the company, my title changed from Senior Operational Consultant to Executive Director of Systems Strategy. The first time I saw my new nameplate outside the glass conference room on the 29th floor, I actually stood there for several seconds staring at it. Naomi Carter. Executive Director. Clean silver lettering against black glass. Simple, professional, real. Nobody handed that title to me because of marriage or connections or family reputation. I earned it sitting at conference tables solving problems while other executives panicked. I earned it during 14-hour restructuring sessions fueled by cold coffee and protein bars. I earned it because systems stopped failing when I touched them. One Thursday afternoon, Daniel walked into my office holding a stack of acquisition reports against his chest. "You saved us about $6 million this quarter," he said casually. I looked up from my monitor. "That seems dramatic." "No," he answered with a grin. "Dramatic would be what happened before you got here." Then he placed the reports on my desk and added quietly, "You know, half the people in this building are terrified of disappointing you." I laughed harder than I expected at that, because for years I had been treated like the least important person in every room. The office itself became part of my recovery in ways I did not expect. The soft hum of elevators in the mornings, fresh marker ink on whiteboards during strategy meetings, my security badge clipped against tailored blazers while I crossed the marble lobby with other executives moving around me. Small things, but after years of disappearing behind Ryan's image, those details started rebuilding something inside me piece by piece. One evening after a board presentation, I caught my reflection in the lobby windows while waiting for my rideshare. Black wool coat, leather work bag over my shoulder, employee badge still clipped near my collarbone, confident posture without forcing it anymore. I barely recognized the woman staring back at me. Around that same time, Ryan's situation started unraveling publicly. Quietly at first. Delayed investor meetings. Rumors about operational instability. Then came the licensing review. Apparently one of the investors flagged irregularities tied to the infrastructure agreements connected to the original framework I built years earlier. The exact framework Ryan never fully understood because he always assumed the technical side belonged to me, in the same way laundry or grocery lists belonged to me. Invisible labor. Necessary but forgettable. Except now lawyers were involved. Compliance teams. Auditors. And suddenly, the details mattered very much. Ryan started calling constantly after that, sometimes 3 or 4 times in a single day. I ignored most of them. One afternoon, he caught me unexpectedly while I was leaving a client dinner downtown. "Naomi, please," he said the second I answered. His voice sounded strained now, tired. "We need to fix this before investors start pulling out." I stepped onto the sidewalk while cold wind pushed between the buildings around me. "Fix what exactly?" "The licensing issue. You mean the operational infrastructure attached to my LLC?" Silence, then a quieter voice. "You knew?" I actually stopped walking for a second. Ryan, I built it. More silence. Heavy this time. I thought, he started before trailing off completely. You thought, what? I asked softly. That I just organized things for you. He exhaled hard into the phone. That is not fair. Fair, though a word almost made me smile. You spent months convincing everyone I contributed nothing to our company, I said calmly. Now suddenly my work matters? A taxi honked somewhere down the street, while people passed around me carrying shopping bags and umbrellas. Normal city noise continuing while my old life cracked apart on the other end of the line. Ryan lowered his voice. Can we meet? I looked up at the glowing office tower across the street where Alder Ridge occupied the top floors. My floors now. No, I answered simply. Then I ended the call before he could say anything else. The following week, Alder Ridge invited me to speak at a National Operations Summit in New York. Hundreds of executives attended. The ballroom lights reflected against rows of polished glass tables, while giant digital screens displayed my presentation title behind me. Operational Stability in High-Risk Expansion Environments. Before walking on stage, an event coordinator adjusted my microphone and smiled nervously. There are a lot of people excited to hear you speak tonight. Excited to hear me, not Ryan, me. I stepped onto the stage while applause filled the ballroom softly around me, and somewhere in the middle of that moment, I realized the woman sitting quietly inside that divorce office months earlier was completely gone now. Then after the presentation ended, my phone buzzed again with another message from Ryan. Only this time, it was not panic anymore. It was fear. The message from Ryan arrived while my plane descended through heavy clouds over Chicago. Please call me before tomorrow morning. This is serious. I stared at the screen while city lights blurred beneath the airplane window like scattered gold across black water. Serious. Everything suddenly became serious once his future was the thing collapsing instead of mine. I slipped the phone back into my coat pocket and watched the wing lights flash against the dark sky all the way to landing. The Investor Summit in New York had ended only 12 hours earlier, but mentally, I already felt 1,000 miles away from that ballroom applause and polished stage lighting. Something about Ryan's voice in those messages unsettled me, not because I missed him. That part was long gone now. It unsettled me because for the first time since the divorce, Ryan sounded like a man who finally understood he was not in control anymore. The next morning, Chicago woke beneath freezing rain and low gray clouds hanging over the skyline. I arrived at Alder Ridge headquarters before 7 carrying a paper cup of coffee that burned my hands through the cardboard sleeve. The marble lobby echoed softly with footsteps while security guards nodded good morning behind the front desk. My badge clicked against the elevator scanner and the doors slid open instantly. 29 floors up, the office still looked half asleep. Dim lights, empty desks, cleaning crews finishing quietly in the conference rooms. I stepped into my office and froze when I saw Daniel already standing beside the windows with his phone pressed against his ear. He turned the second I walked in. She just got here, he said into the phone before lowering it slowly. His expression immediately told me something was wrong. What happened? I asked. Daniel rubbed one hand across his jaw. Ryan Carter's company halted operations overnight. I set my coffee down too quickly, and some of it spilled across the desk. What? Investors froze expansion funding after the licensing review escalated. He paused carefully. Apparently legal discovered the operational framework rights were never actually transferred to his corporation. I stared at him silently while rain streaked against the windows behind us. He cannot legally operate the infrastructure without authorization from your LLC. My stomach tightened unexpectedly. Not satisfaction, not revenge. Just the strange weight of consequences finally arriving. Daniel studied my face for a moment before speaking again. Did he know? I looked down at the coffee, slowly spreading across the desk between my hands. No, I answered quietly. He never asked enough questions. Around noon, my assistant informed me someone was waiting downstairs asking specifically for me. He refused to leave, she added carefully. I already knew before she even said his name. Ryan stood near the far side of the lobby when I stepped out of the elevator. Dark navy coat damp from the rain, hair slightly disheveled like he had been running his hands through it repeatedly. He looked thinner than I remembered. Tired in a way expensive clothes could not hide anymore. The second he saw me, his entire posture shifted. Naomi, he said quickly, stepping forward. I stayed where I was. You should not be here. I did not know what else to do. His voice cracked slightly on the last word. That alone almost shocked me more than the rest of this situation combined. Ryan Carter never cracked, never stumbled, never looked uncertain in public, but today his confidence looked held together by exhaustion and panic. People crossed the lobby around us carrying umbrellas and laptops while soft jazz played through hidden speakers overhead. Normal morning business life continuing quietly beside the wreckage of ours. The board thinks I misrepresented ownership disclosures, Ryan said carefully. Investors are threatening legal action if operations stay frozen. That sounds serious, I answered calmly. He flinched slightly at my tone. Naomi, please. Hearing him say, please still felt unfamiliar. He lowered his voice and stepped closer. I know I hurt you. I know I handled everything terribly. But this affects hundreds of employees. Employees. Not us. Not marriage. Business finally gave him language for empathy. I crossed my arms slowly against the cold air drifting through the lobby entrance. What exactly are you asking me for? Ryan looked away briefly before answering. Authorization. Temporary licensing access until legal resolves the ownership transfer. Ownership transfer. The phrase almost made me laugh because there had never been a transfer at all. 7 years earlier, Ryan signed documents he barely read because he trusted me completely with the operational side of the company. Back then, he used to kiss my forehead absent-mindedly, while saying things like, "You always handle the complicated details better than I do." Neither of us understood that those details would someday become the line dividing our entire future. Naomi, Ryan said again quietly, can we at least sit down somewhere private and talk? Before I could answer, the lobby television mounted above reception suddenly switched to a breaking business segment. A financial anchor appeared on screen discussing operational fraud investigations tied to Ryan's company, while scrolling headlines flashed beneath her image. Several people nearby slowed down to watch. Ryan turned pale almost instantly. Then his phone started vibrating continuously in his coat pocket, while all around us the lobby suddenly felt unbearably still. And standing there beneath the soft white lights of Alder Ridge headquarters, I realized the truth was finally about to become public. The lobby stayed almost completely silent, except for the low murmur of the television broadcast overhead and the constant vibration of Ryan's phone inside his coat pocket. People were pretending not to stare at us, but they were. I could feel it in the way conversations nearby slowed down, the way a receptionist kept glancing toward the screen, mounted above the security desk, where financial headlines scrolled beneath Ryan's company logo. Operational ownership dispute threatens major expansion deal. Ryan looked like he could barely process what was happening fast enough. He pulled his phone from his pocket finally and stared at the screen while message after message appeared across it. Board members, investors, legal counsel. His hand actually trembled slightly before he shoved the phone back into his coat. Naomi, he said quietly, please do not do this here. I looked at him for a long moment. Do what? He lowered his voice further. You know what. But the truth was, I had not exposed him publicly. I never needed to. Reality was doing that part on its own now. The problem was never revenge. The problem was that Ryan built an empire on assumptions. Assumptions that I would always stay quiet. Assumptions that my work existed only to support his success. Assumptions that details did not matter because he never imagined the person handling them would someday stop protecting him. One of the lobby televisions switched to a recorded interview clip featuring Ryan from nearly 2 years earlier. He sat smiling confidently in a tailored suit, talking about leadership strategy and operational innovation. I built this company from the ground up, television, Ryan said smoothly. Every system reflects my long-term vision. I heard someone behind reception whisper softly, "Oh my God." Ryan closed his eyes briefly, like hearing his own words now physically hurt him. Then the elevator doors opened behind me, and Daniel stepped into the lobby carrying a stack of legal folders. His expression changed instantly when he saw Ryan standing there. "We have a conference room available upstairs," Daniel said carefully. "If this conversation needs privacy." Ryan looked almost relieved. We rode the elevator to the 29th floor in complete silence except for the soft mechanical hum between levels. Ryan stared at the numbers above the doors while rain streaked across the glass walls surrounding us. I noticed then how exhausted he looked. Dark circles beneath his eyes, wrinkles at the corners of his mouth I did not remember before. Stress had aged him quickly. Inside the conference room, Daniel placed the legal documents neatly on the table, before excusing himself without another word. Ryan sat down heavily across from me, while city traffic moved far below outside the windows. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then he finally looked at me directly. How much do they know? I folded my hands calmly against the table. Enough. Naomi, his voice cracked again. Did you plan this? I almost laughed at that because the irony felt unbelievable. You mean, did I spend years quietly building operational systems while you ignored what I actually did? His jaw tightened. That is not what I meant. No, I said softly. I think it is exactly what you meant. Rain tapped steadily against the windows behind me, while Ryan leaned forward slowly, like he was trying to understand a language he should have learned years ago. Why did you never tell me? He asked finally. That question sat between us longer than he probably realized, because I had told him, constantly, just never in ways he considered important enough to hear. I tried, I answered quietly. You just liked the version of me that stayed smaller. He looked down immediately after that. For the first time since I met him, Ryan Carter looked ashamed. A sharp knock interrupted the silence before the conference room door opened suddenly. Trevor walked in first, followed by Ryan's mother, still wearing her cream-colored wool coat from the morning. The second she saw me sitting there beside the legal files, her entire expression hardened. What exactly is happening? She demanded sharply. Ryan stood immediately. Mom, not now. No, she snapped. I want answers. Then she turned toward me with that same cold superiority she carried through my entire marriage. If this is some emotional retaliation— It is not, I interrupted calmly. That stopped her instantly because I had almost never interrupted her before. I slid one of the legal folders slowly across the table toward her. The operational infrastructure rights were never transferred to Ryan's corporation. They remained attached to my LLC under the original framework agreement signed in 2017. Trevor frowned. What does that mean? I looked at him directly. It means the company everyone believed Ryan built alone legally depends on systems I created and owned before the expansion ever happened. Silence. Complete silence. Ryan's mother opened the folder with stiff movements while her eyes scanned the legal documents faster and faster. I watched the exact moment realization hit her because the color drained slowly from her face. No, she whispered. Ryan finally looked at me again then. Really looked at me, like he was seeing an entirely different person sitting across the table. Not the wife who organized dinners or supported investor meetings quietly from the background. Not the woman everyone dismissed as emotionally dependent and professionally unremarkable. For the first time in 11 years, my entire family was being forced to confront the truth about who I had always been. Then Trevor spoke softly into the silence without taking his eyes off the documents in front of him. Ryan, he said carefully, you told everyone she did not build any of this. The silence after Trevor's words felt heavier than shouting ever could. Rain continued tapping softly against the conference room windows, while Ryan's mother stared down at the documents in front of her, like the pages had physically betrayed her. Trevor slowly lowered himself into one of the leather chairs near the wall, without taking his eyes off the licensing agreements. This cannot be right, Ryan's mother whispered finally. Her voice sounded smaller now. Unsteady. I looked at her calmly across the table. It is. She flipped through the pages faster. Ryan would have known. Ryan did not answer. That silence told her more than any legal document could. I watched the exact moment. Panic replaced denial in her expression, because suddenly every conversation from the past 11 years started rearranging itself in real time inside her head. Every investor dinner where I quietly corrected operational issues before they became disasters. Every late night Ryan spent confidently presenting systems he never actually built. Every moment they dismissed me as supportive instead of essential. Trevor leaned forward slowly. Wait, he said carefully, looking at Ryan now. When the company almost collapsed in 2019 after the Denver client situation, that was Naomi? Ryan rubbed one hand hard across his face before answering. The infrastructure redesign was hers. Trevor blinked twice. You told everyone you handled that yourself. Ryan looked exhausted suddenly. Not angry anymore, just exhausted. I thought I did. I almost interrupted at that, but stopped myself because the truth was more complicated than simple lying. Ryan had convinced himself of his own version over time. That was the dangerous part. He genuinely believed visibility mattered more than foundation. If people saw him leading, he assumed he must be the one carrying everything. Meanwhile, I spent years solving problems quietly enough that eventually, even my husband stopped noticing I was the reason the company survived at all. Ryan's mother finally looked directly at me again. Why would you hide something this important? I held her gaze steadily. I did not hide it. Her forehead tightened slightly. Then why did nobody know? That question almost made me smile because it revealed everything about how our family worked. Nobody knew because nobody asked. Nobody looked closely enough at the quiet woman in the room to wonder what she was actually doing. They saw Ryan speaking at conferences and assumed he built the systems behind him because confidence photographs better than competence. You all preferred the version of me that stayed in the background, I answered softly. It made everyone more comfortable. The room went still again after that. Outside the glass walls, employees moved through hallways, carrying coffee cups and laptops, while phones rang somewhere beyond the conference room doors. Life continuing normally around the collapse of mine and Ryan's entire history together. Then Ryan spoke quietly for the first time in several minutes. I never wanted this to happen. I turned toward him slowly. Which part? He looked down at the table immediately. All of it. His voice sounded sincere. That was what made it sad instead of satisfying. Because somewhere beneath all the ego and betrayal and selfishness, I think Ryan genuinely did love me once. He just loved being admired more. His mother suddenly straightened in her chair like she was trying to recover control of the situation. Surely this can still be resolved privately, she said carefully. There is no reason to destroy everything over paperwork. Paperwork. The same woman who once treated legal agreements like sacred instruments of wealth suddenly wanted emotional flexibility once the document stopped protecting her son. I folded my hands calmly. I am not destroying anything. But you are refusing authorization. No, I corrected gently. I am refusing to continue giving away work people spent years pretending I never did. Trevor looked between us awkwardly before speaking again. So what happens now? I leaned back slightly in my chair. The board decides whether Ryan misrepresented operational ownership to investors. Legal decides whether prior disclosures violated compliance agreements. And I decide whether I am willing to license my infrastructure moving forward. Ryan closed his eyes briefly after hearing that. Infrastructure. My infrastructure. Not ours anymore. Mine. The distinction sat heavily in the room. His mother looked genuinely shaken now. Naomi, she said more quietly this time. We are family. I stared at her for several seconds before answering, because those words would have destroyed me a year earlier. Family. The thing I spent most of my life trying to earn by becoming smaller, quieter, easier to dismiss. But now the words sounded different. Hollow somehow. Family should have recognized me before they needed something from me, I said softly. No one argued after that. Eventually Trevor stood and left first, still carrying the legal folder in both hands, like it weighed more than paper should. Ryan's mother followed a few minutes later without another sharp comment. She paused near the door once, glanced back at me with an expression I could not fully read anymore, then walked out silently. That left only Ryan and me alone in the conference room, while gray afternoon light faded slowly across the city outside. He sat there for a long time, staring at the table between us, before finally asking the one question I think had been haunting him since this entire thing started. When you signed the divorce papers, he said quietly, why did you thank me? I looked at him carefully then, really looked at him. The man I once built a future around. The man who thought taking everything visible meant he had won. And for the first time since our marriage ended, I realized I no longer hated him at all. But forgiveness and trust are not the same thing. Not even close. Ryan never fully recovered the company the way it used to be. The board eventually negotiated a licensing agreement through my attorneys that allowed operations to continue without shutting down completely, but the illusion surrounding him never returned after the truth became public. Investors stayed cautious. Several executives resigned quietly over the following months. Savannah disappeared from his social media sometime before Christmas. I never asked what happened between them because by then, his personal life no longer belonged inside my emotional world. And strangely enough, that was the real victory. Not revenge, not watching someone fail, just reaching a point where another person no longer controlled the temperature of your peace. My own life became quieter after that. Fuller too. Alder Ridge expanded my division nationally. And 6 months later, I moved into a new apartment, overlooking the river, with tall windows and soft morning light that stretched across the hardwood floors every sunrise. Some nights I still worked too late with takeout containers beside my laptop and jazz music humming softly through the speakers. But now the exhaustion belonged to something I chose for myself. That difference matters more than people realize. One Sunday morning in early spring, I walked into a small bookstore cafe near Lincoln Park, carrying a stack of operational reports under my arm. The woman behind the counter smiled and said, "The usual, Naomi?" It was such a small moment. Ordinary. But I remember standing there holding my coffee, while sunlight warmed the windows, and realizing I finally felt rooted inside my own life again. Not surviving it, not performing inside it, living it. My relationship with my family changed too, although not dramatically all at once. Trevor called me several times after everything happened, at first awkwardly, then honestly. One evening he admitted quietly over dinner, "I think we all got used to underestimating you because you never demanded attention." I stirred my tea slowly before answering. People should not have to perform loudly to be respected. He nodded without defending himself. That mattered more than apologies sometimes. Ryan's mother eventually sent me a handwritten letter on cream stationery about 4 months after the legal situation settled. I almost threw it away unopened. Instead, I sat near my apartment window one rainy evening and read every page slowly while city lights blurred outside. There was no dramatic confession inside, no sudden transformation, just a woman finally acknowledging that she spent years valuing visibility over substance and status over character. The final line simply said, "I wish I had seen you clearly sooner." I folded the letter carefully afterward and placed it inside a drawer beside old photographs I no longer needed to hate. As for Ryan, we spoke one final time nearly a year after the divorce. Not in a courtroom, not through attorneys, just two people sitting across from each other at a quiet restaurant near the lake where winter snow melted slowly against the sidewalks outside. He looked older, calmer somehow. "I spent a long time thinking success meant being admired," he admitted while staring down at his coffee cup. "I do not think I understood partnership at all. I listened quietly because there was nothing left to win anymore." Before we left, he looked at me carefully and asked, "Do you ever regret us?" I thought about that question all the way down to my hands, resting near the edge of the table. Then I answered honestly, "No, but I regret how much of myself I abandoned trying to keep the marriage alive." Ryan nodded slowly like he already knew that was true. We walked out separately afterward into the cold evening air, and I remember watching snowflakes land softly against the shoulders of my coat while traffic lights reflected across the wet streets around us. It did not feel tragic. It felt finished. I think that is something people misunderstand about healing. Closure rarely arrives like a dramatic speech in movies. Sometimes it arrives quietly while standing at a crosswalk, realizing your body no longer tenses at the sound of someone's name. Sometimes it arrives when you stop needing people to finally understand your worth because you already know it yourself. If there is one thing this story taught me, it is that intuition whispers long before life starts screaming. The moments you shrink yourself to keep peace. The times your accomplishments become invisible inside someone else's ego. The exhaustion of constantly proving your value to people determined not to see it. Those feelings matter. God, or the universe, or whatever you personally believe in, gives us instincts for a reason. Listen to them earlier than I did. Protect your finances. Protect your independence. Protect the version of yourself that exists before anyone convinces you to become smaller for their comfort. Love should never require disappearing. And if someone listening to my story right now feels trapped inside loneliness, betrayal, or the slow grief of no longer recognizing yourself, I want you to know something gently but honestly. You are not difficult for wanting respect. You are not selfish for creating boundaries. And it is never too late to rebuild a life that finally feels like your own. My name is Naomi Carter. I am 36 years old, and the biggest lesson I want to leave with you is this. Never hand someone so much power that you lose sight of yourself trying to keep them happy. Thank you for sitting with me through this story. Truly, in a world where so many people suffer quietly behind closed doors, being heard matters more than we admit. If this story stayed with you in some way, you can leave a comment sharing where you are listening from, because sometimes strangers heal each other simply by reminding one another that nobody is carrying pain alone. And if stories about resilience, emotional healing, family betrayal, and rebuilding your life speak to your heart, there are more waiting for you in the next videos on this channel. Some will make you angry. Some will break your heart quietly. But a few of them might help you recognize your own strength before life forces you to. And sometimes, that realization changes everything.